Ethan Cole was a space pilot, but not the kind that people wrote stories about. He was not rich, not famous, and his ship was not shiny. It was old, patched together with different metal plates, and smelled faintly of heated oil. He carried cargo from one place to another because that was what paid for his food and fuel. Most of his jobs were quiet and boring. He liked it that way. This time, he was supposed to fly from a colony near Mars to Earth and deliver refined ore. The work was simple: set the coordinates, make the jump, and collect payment at the docking station. But life rarely stayed simple for long, especially when the navigation system belonged in a museum. The computer had been glitching for weeks. Ethan had planned to fix it after this trip. He never got that chance. Everything went wrong when the engine light began to blink. First yellow, then red, then a deep crimson that made his stomach tighten. He tapped the control panel and muttered, "Don't do this now." The display flickered. The stars outside stretched and warped like they were melting. Then came the sound no pilot wanted to hear, the thin rising whine of a jump drive losing control. Before Ethan could reboot the system, the ship hurled itself through the jump gate. The stars disappeared. The cabin shook so hard his seat belts bit into his shoulders. Then there was silence. Not normal space silence, but the kind that made his ears ring and his neck hairs bristle. When he opened his eyes, Earth was gone. In its place stretched a marble-white planet surrounded by fleets of silver ships. Every light on his console flashed red. They were hailing him again and again. He pressed a button and tried to answer, but the words on the screen made no sense. Some kind of military encryption. Seconds later, his sensors screamed that 4 large security crafts were locking onto his coordinates. "Great," he said softly. "I've jumped into someone's party uninvited." Metal drones surrounded the ship. Blue lights scanned every inch of the hull. One of them sent a boarding request. Ethan had no idea what law he was breaking, but something told him that refusing was worse. He allowed the docking clamps to attach. When the hatch opened, bright light poured into the cabin. 5 tall guards in white uniforms stepped inside. Their armor gleamed like polished steel, and every one of them carried a stun rifle. The one in front looked him over from head to toe. "Your Grace," the guard said formally, "we thought you would never arrive." Ethan blinked. "My what?" They did not answer. Instead, they escorted him through shining corridors that smelled faintly of flowers and ozone. He tried to explain he was only a freight pilot who had lost his way, but no one listened. Everyone who passed bowed slightly to him, smiling as if greeting an old friend. At last they entered a hall so large that his whole ship could have fit inside. The walls were covered in silver and white banners, and hundreds of people dressed in elegant clothes sat on long benches. An orchestra played soft music in the background. In the middle stood a beautiful young woman in a white gown, her dark hair braided with small crystals that flashed under the light. She turned sharply when she saw him. Surprise flickered in her eyes, quickly followed by shock and something that looked like anger. "Who is this?" she asked the guards, her voice calm but cold. The guard bowed. "Your Highness, this is your bridegroom. He has arrived, as foretold." Ethan's mouth went dry. "Bridegroom?" He tried to laugh, thinking maybe it was some kind of joke or misunderstanding. But the faces around him were serious, expectant, almost relieved. Someone handed him a ceremonial jacket made of thin, shining fabric and gestured for him to put it on. "Hold on," Ethan said, raising his hands. "I think you have the wrong guy. I just crashed here by mistake." But his words were drowned out by the sound of music growing louder. Trumpets began to play. The large doors closed behind him. A man in robes stepped forward with a golden book in hand and began to speak about union, destiny, and devotion between kingdoms. Ethan stood frozen. He tried to back away, but the guards behind him blocked his path. The princess looked at him with wide, furious eyes, though a hint of amusement broke through the shock. In less than a heartbeat, Ethan Cole, cargo pilot from Mars, realized he was part of a ceremony he did not understand. The music swelled, the crowd cheered, and he wondered if this was what it felt like to fall into a dream, one that refused to wake up. At that moment, as the officiant raised his hand and spoke the final vow, Ethan had just one thought running through his head. He had really, truly, absolutely jumped to the wrong place. Ethan Cole stood at the front of the grand hall, still trying to understand what was happening. The music, the cheers, and the flashing lights all blended together into one dizzy noise. He wanted to say again that they had made a mistake, but no one was listening. The people were smiling and throwing flower petals into the air. Everyone seemed sure that this strange man from nowhere was the princess's chosen husband. The princess herself looked like she would rather face a storm than this moment. Her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes sharp. She stood tall beside him, her hands folded neatly before her, trying to hide how tense she was. When the officiant told them to hold hands, she placed hers in his without looking at him. Her skin was cold, whispered very softly, "I think there's been a mix-up." She did not answer. She only kept her eyes forward and said through clenched teeth, "Smile. They are watching." Ethan smiled awkwardly, more like a grimace, but it seemed to please the crowd. Laughter and clapping filled the huge room. A golden ribbon was tied around their joined hands, and the minister declared them united before all the kingdoms. Moments later, 100 voices shouted in celebration. The music grew louder, and the air smelled of sweet perfume and bright lights. Ethan was too dazed to move until the princess turned sharply toward the exit. He followed, unsure of where to go, half expecting a soldier to stop him and accuse him of something. When they were finally alone in a smaller chamber, she turned to him and said quietly but firmly, "Who are you?" He blinked at her. "Ethan Cole." "I'm a pilot, not whatever this is." He waved vaguely toward the direction of the hall. She studied him in silence, her green eyes narrowing. "Then why did the guards bring you here?" "My real bridegroom was supposed to arrive from the northern territories this morning." Ethan raised both hands helplessly. "Look, my ship jumped by mistake. I don't even know this planet's name. I was supposed to be landing in New London Station on Earth." She frowned. "You are saying you came from Earth?" "Yes," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Probably through some kind of navigation error. And now, apparently, I'm married to a princess." She sighed and looked away. "This is impossible. The council will never allow an annulment now that the ceremony has been public. They will claim it as destiny." "Annulment sounds great," Ethan said quickly, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm all for that. Just tell me where to sign." But she only shook her head. "You do not understand. My kingdom has been facing pressure from the High Council for months. They needed this wedding to stabilize support among the houses. If the truth comes out that I have married by mistake, it will be seen as weakness. It might even bring unrest." Ethan stared at her. "So, I can't just go home?" "Not yet," she said, her tone resigned. "If the people believe that our union was fated, breaking it now would cause chaos." She turned back toward him, her voice a little softer. "What did you say your name was?" Ethan Cole." "Then for now, Ethan Cole, you will behave as my husband. The council will be watching you. Every word you say and every step you take must fit the story they are building around us." He laughed quietly. "You want me to pretend to be your husband?" "I do not want to," she replied, a hint of dry humor in her voice. "But I see no other choice." Servants soon came into the chamber, bowing deeply, bringing fine clothes for Ethan and a silver tray of food. Each one looked excited, whispering about the miraculous bridegroom from the stars. Ethan felt their eyes on him as though they were staring at a hero from an old story rather than a lost pilot who wanted nothing more than a shower and a new map. That evening, as the sun set beyond the palace windows, the city below sparkled with celebration. Bells were ringing, fireworks flashing in gold and white across the sky. From the balcony, Ethan could see crowds filling the streets below, cheering for their new royal couple. Beside him, the princess spoke softly, almost to herself. "They believe you came to fulfill an ancient promise, that a man of no title would unite the divided lands." "Sorry to disappoint," Ethan said, resting his arms on the railing. "I'm good with engines, not politics." "You may have little choice," she said, glancing sideways at him. "For tonight, you are no longer a pilot. You're the royal bridegroom of our people." Ethan looked at her, half laughing, half in disbelief. "So that's it. 1 minute I'm flying cargo across Mars. The next I'm wearing fancy clothes and pretending to be someone important." Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile, though she quickly hid it. Life has a strange sense of humor, it seems. He stared out at the glittering city, still hearing the echo of distant cheers. It all felt unreal, like he was living someone else's life. But deep down, he sensed that this mistake, however ridiculous, was only the beginning of a story he couldn't yet understand. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan Cole was still stuck in the palace. He had a soft bed, good food, and clothes that probably cost more than his old ship. But every morning he woke up missing the hum of his engines. The palace was too quiet, too polished. Even the air felt heavy with rules. Servants bowed when they saw him. Guards followed him at a distance. Everyone called him my lord or your grace, though he could see the confusion in their eyes. He knew they were asking the same question he kept asking himself. Who was this stranger who had married their princess? Princess Liana had not spoken much since the wedding. She spent her days meeting with council members, studying reports, looking over messages that came from other kingdoms. Ethan only saw her during meals or formal events. She behaved politely but kept her words short, as if she were afraid too much conversation might make things worse. Still, he noticed the way she always sat straight, how calm she looked even when everyone around her seemed afraid of making mistakes. The people loved the story. Newspapers printed pictures of the mysterious bridegroom from the stars. Some said he was a warrior who had come to protect the throne. Others said he was a messenger sent by fate. Children in the streets played games pretending to be him. Ethan could not step outside the palace gates without being chased by cheering crowds. He began to understand why the princess had said they could not undo the marriage. People had already made him into a legend. One afternoon, he wandered into the palace hangar, a huge hall filled with royal ships. Most of them were sleek and silver, built for display more than speed. One corner of the hangar was full of broken machines and dusty tools. Ethan rolled up his sleeves and began to fix a small service drone that had been abandoned on the floor. It felt good to touch real metal again, good to work with his hands. The chief mechanic found him there hours later, crouched beneath a machine with grease on his face. The man's mouth dropped open in shock. "Your Grace, you should not be doing this yourself." "Relax," Ethan said with a grin. "I don't break things, I fix them." Word spread quickly through the palace. Servants and guards whispered that the new bridegroom was not too proud to work with his hands. Some laughed about it, but most found it strange and admirable. Even Liana heard about it from one of her attendants. She came to the hangar the next morning. "There you are," she said when she saw him bent over a half-rayed ship. Ethan looked up, brushing his hands on a rag. "Here I am trying to make myself useful. These ships could run better if someone just gave them a little care." She watched him quietly. "You do not act like any royal I know." "That's because I'm not one," he said simply. Her lips curved for the first time, not quite a smile, but close. "And yet people already speak of you as if you were sent by the heavens." "I'd rather they stop that," he replied. "I'm just a guy who got lost." "Perhaps," she said softly, "but you were also the man who saved this kingdom from public humiliation. Whether you wanted to or not, you became part of its story." Ethan wanted to argue, but she looked so serious that he stayed silent. Later that evening, she invited him to attend a council meeting with her. There were men and women wearing long robes, each talking about trade routes, food shortages, and growing unrest in some parts of the land. Ethan sat beside her, completely lost in their formal language. But when one council member suggested cutting help to the poor towns to save money, Ethan spoke up without thinking. "That's foolish," he said. "You don't strengthen a city by starving its people." The room went silent. The nobles looked shocked that anyone, especially the new bridegroom, would interrupt them. But Liana did not look angry. She studied him thoughtfully. "Explain," she said. Ethan leaned forward. "If those towns fall into trouble, your trade routes go with them. Help them now and they'll help you later. Simple." To everyone's surprise, the princess nodded. "He is correct," she said. From that moment, whispers spread through the palace about how wise and bold the new husband was. Some admired him. Others began to fear what his influence might mean. At the end of the day, as they walked back to their chambers, Liana spoke again. He spoke plainly today. You shamed men who have spent their lives hiding behind polite words. "Sometimes polite words don't get the job done," Ethan said with a shrug. She looked at him, something new in her eyes, something that was not annoyance or obligation. "Perhaps you truly were meant to arrive here," she said quietly. He smiled. "Or perhaps I was just unlucky enough to crash into history." That night, as the palace slept, Ethan looked out at the endless sky through the window. He still longed for his ship, for the simple work of flying from one port to another. But part of him now felt tied to this strange world, and to the woman whose life had become tangled with his. He was not sure where this strange path would lead, but for the first time since he arrived, he wanted to see where it would go. The peace in the palace did not last long. Rumors started to spread beyond the city walls about the missing duke who had once been promised to the princess. Some said he had left because he could not stand losing power to a stranger. Others whispered that he was raising an army to take back what he believed was his. The council tried to hide the news, but fear has its own way of traveling. Soon the whole kingdom was talking about war. Ethan Cole had no idea how serious the situation was until he walked into the royal dining hall one morning and found it filled with guards in full armor. Princess Liana was standing near the window, speaking in sharp tones to a group of officers. Her calm voice carried across the room, but her hands gripped the table so tightly her knuckles were white. When she saw Ethan, she stopped speaking and met his eyes. "The Duke has returned," she said quietly. "He has declared me an impostor. He says this marriage was false." Ethan frowned. "He wants your throne." "He wants control," she answered. "He says the people were tricked by a stranger who came from nowhere. He has already gathered followers in the outer provinces." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "So he's starting a rebellion?" Liana nodded. "If he reaches the capital, the council might turn against me. They will say it was a mistake to keep you here." He looked at her for a long time. "Then we need to stop him before he gets here." She stared at him, surprised by how certain his voice sounded. "You are not a soldier." "No," Ethan said with a small smile. "I'm a pilot. I plan ahead, I fix problems, and I hate losing. Let me help." That afternoon he went to the palace hangar again, studying the royal defense ships that hung suspended on magnetic frames. They were sleek and strong, though half of them needed repairs. The chief mechanic hesitated to let him near them, but when Ethan climbed into the pilot seat, his steady hands and calm voice convinced everyone that he knew exactly what he was doing. For 3 days straight, he worked on the ships with the crew. He installed stronger shields, adjusted the engines to move faster, and even taught the young pilots how to make sharp turns during space maneuvers that could confuse enemies. The soldiers respected him for his knowledge more than his title. To them, he was not just the bridegroom, but a man who understood machines and people alike. Meanwhile, the princess met with the council every night. Ethan could see the tired circles under her eyes deepening, but she still stood tall. They prepared for battle, though no one wanted one. When the first reports came that the Duke's fleet was entering orbit, the city's alarm bells began to ring. The people gathered in panic around the palace gates. Ethan found Liana in the war room, surrounded by maps and frightened officials. "They outnumber us 2-1, she said in a low voice. "If the council surrenders, the kingdom will fall." Ethan stepped closer to the map. "Then we don't fight them the way they expect. We make them chase us." The room fell silent. The generals looked at him with confusion. He pointed to the map. "Their fleet is heavy. Takes time to move. We can lure them into the asteroid belt near the outer orbit. I can pilot the lead ship and draw them in. They'll think they're trapping us, but they'll get stuck in the debris field." Liana hesitated, torn between fear and hope. "It could work," she said slowly, "but you would be risking your life." "I've been risking it since I crash-landed here," Ethan answered. Hours later, the defense fleet launched from the city under his command. The sky above the capital turned dark with moving lights. Ethan sat in the pilot seat of the lead ship, gripping the controls with the same calm focus he always had back when he carried cargo alone in the silence of space. The Duke's ships followed, falling for the bait. Lasers flashed, and the black sky turned bright as day. Ethan guided the fleet between rocks and fragments that floated like sleeping giants. When the enemy closed in, he switched frequencies and shouted, "Now!" The smaller defense ships turned sharply, weaving through the belt. Enemy, larger and slower, crashed into heavy debris. Explosions echoed through the void. One by one, their ships broke apart. Back in the capital, people watched from the ground as fire streaked across the sky like shooting stars. The battle was short, but fierce. By nightfall, the enemy's signal was gone. When Ethan's ship landed, the palace guards and citizens cheered. The princess came forward among them, her face illuminated by torchlight. She looked at him not with formality, but with relief. "You saved us," she said softly. He shook his head. "We saved ourselves." That night, peace returned to the capital, though everyone knew the story would spread far beyond its borders. The man who had arrived by mistake had led a battle and won. In the silence of the palace garden later, Lyanna stood beside him under the stars. "You came here by accident, Ethan," she said, her voice gentle. "But nothing about you feels like an accident anymore." He looked up at the sky, where the last signs of the battle still glimmered faintly. "Maybe I just found the right place at the wrong time," he said with a grin. For the first time, she laughed. And in that laugh, the sound of fear faded, replaced by something new, something like hope. Morning light poured into the royal palace and touched every corner of the marble walls. The air felt lighter than it had in many weeks. The battle was over. The capital was safe again. People filled the streets, singing and cheering the names of Princess Lyanna and Ethan Cole, the stranger who had come from the stars. Flags waved from every balcony. Bells rang across the city. The sound of joy echoed from the mountains to the sea. Ethan watched from the balcony beside Lyanna. His body was tired and sore from the fight, but his heart was calm. Down below, children ran through the streets, waving small banners with his name printed on them. He had never seen people so happy, and he was both amazed and humbled by it. Lyanna turned toward him, her long hair shining in the sunlight. "You've done more for this kingdom than anyone expected," she said. "Even the council speaks your name now with respect." Ethan gave a small laugh. "That's good, because I think half of them wanted to throw me out the day I landed here." Her smile was faint but warm. Many things have changed since that day. They stood quietly for a while, listening to the drums and songs outside. The air smelled of flowers and spice, the scent of celebration. But inside Ethan, there was a small ache he could not ignore. He turned to her. "Lyanna, now that the danger is past, maybe it's time for me to go home." Her face lost its smile, but her voice remained steady. "You wish to leave?" "I don't belong here," he said softly. "I'm just a man who flies ships for a living. Never meant to wear crowns or lead fleets. I should fix things, not rule them." She looked down at her hands for a moment, then raised her eyes to meet his. "Perhaps you belong here more than you think. The people trust you. You have given them courage. So they see something honest in you that they rarely see in their rulers." Ethan sighed and gazed at the horizon. "Maybe that's why I should go, before I make any mistakes that ruin what they have." Lyanna stepped closer. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of roses from the gardens below. "If you leave, I will not stop you," she said softly. "But do not go because you think you are unworthy. Go only if your heart truly calls you somewhere else." He looked into her eyes, searching for an answer. There was kindness there, and strength, and something deeper that he did not see on that first day when she had scolded him in front of a hall full of strangers. She was a companion, someone whose presence gave him peace. Days passed as preparations for a grand celebration continued. The kingdom wanted to honor their victory. Carriages brought people from distant towns, and lights decorated every street. The city buzzed with happiness. Only Ethan seemed heavy-hearted. He wandered off into the hangar, where his ship, repaired and shining, stood ready. It looked smaller than he remembered, but it carried a promise of freedom. One evening, Lyanna came to the hangar and found him there, sitting on the ramp of his ship. "It is beautiful," she said, looking at the sleek silver hull. Ethan nodded slowly. "It used to be my whole world, and now," she asked quietly, looked at her, unsure how to speak the truth. "Now it feels like a door that leads away from something I don't too want to lose." She stepped closer. "The choice is yours, Ethan. You may leave tonight if you wish. The council will not stop you." He smiled a little. "You sound too calm about it. I learned that sometimes the best way to keep something is not to hold it too tightly," she said, her voice almost a whisper. For a long moment, they both stood in the quiet between the humming engines and the soft night wind. Finally, Ethan said, "When I first crashed here, I just wanted to fix my mistake and fly away. But now I see that maybe I was sent here for a reason. Maybe I was supposed to help you. Maybe I was supposed to find you." Her eyes shone in the low light. "And have you found what you were looking for?" He nodded. "Yes, something worth staying for." The celebration the next day was the grandest the kingdom had ever seen. Crowds filled the grand square, shouting joyfully as fireworks burst across the sky. The people cheered for their royal couple, the brave princess and the pilot who had come from beyond their world. When the ceremony ended, Ethan stood beside Liana as she addressed her people. Her voice was strong and full of hope. She spoke of unity, courage, and the promise of a new future. Then she turned to Ethan and said, "Together we will protect this peace, for it was born from both courage and chance." The crowd exploded into cheers once more. That night, when the stars appeared above the palace, Ethan looked up at them and thought of the road that had led him here. He had arrived by accident, lost and confused. He had become a legend without meaning to. But in doing so, he had found something more valuable than any treasure. He had found purpose, belonging, and love. As he stood beside Liana on the same balcony where it had all begun, she reached for his hand. The city lights sparkled below them like stars brought down to earth. Ethan smiled. "Guess I finally landed in the right place." Liana's fingers tightened around his. "May you never want to leave it." The wind stirred around them gently, carrying the sound of distant music and laughter. For the first time since his ship had fallen out of the sky, Ethan Cole felt truly at home.